In the small town of Willow Creek, Tennessee, nestled among trailing pines and quiet streets, life had always felt safe, nearly too safe. Everyone knew everyone. The days followed a predictable pattern. Children walked home from the bus stop together, and nights were quiet enough that the low hum of the cicadas was enough to remind you you were alive. Amy Daniels lived there at the end of Maple Hill Drive. The house was old, built sometime in the 1940s, with weathered white siding and a sagging porch that creaked whenever she stepped out at night. Amy had moved back into her childhood town after her parents passed, hoping to find some peace, and had taken up the job of librarian at the local branch of the county library. Her calm routine centered on early mornings, brewing coffee, walking through the pines behind her house, greeting the squirrels and cardinals, and then her evenings when the town's hush wrapped her like a blanket. One September evening, close to dusk, she sat in the living room sipping her coffee as the light faded. Outside the window, her backyard stretched into dense woods, the undergrowth thick and wild. She heard it then, a soft scraping, like something dragging over the fallen leaves just beyond the tree line. She paused, alert, staring at the curtain rustle as the wind pushed it. But the sound repeated, one slow scrape, then another. It didn't seem like a branch. It sounded deliberate. Amy set her mug down and crossed to the window, peering into the gray shadow of the woods. Nothing. She put on a light jacket, walked outside onto the porch, and looked into the trees. The dusk was fading fast. The pines now stood as dark, slender shapes. She imagined a deer, perhaps, or a raccoon. The sound had stopped. Shaking her head, she went inside, locked the door, and sat back down. The next night, the same sound returned, only louder, closer. It came while she was reading. The dragging across the leaves, then a low thud as if something heavy had landed on the ground near the pines. Her heart rate picked up. She stared toward the window again, the trees now deeply shadowed. A figure stepped out. It was a tall man, thin, and wore what looked like a dirty white mask. His body was draped in dark rags, and in his hand he carried what seemed like a long metal rod or crowbar. He lifted it slowly, scanning toward the house. Amy froze. The porch light flickered. The man looked up directly toward her window and held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned and walked into the woods again, disappearing. Amy felt icy all over. She couldn't move. The door was locked, she told herself. The man had entered the woods, not the yard. She stayed inside the rest of the night. In the morning, she called the sheriff's office. She reported the figure in the mask, the sound of dragging, everything she saw. The sheriff listened politely, asked questions, told her to stay vigilant, that they would send a patroller through if necessary. Days passed uneventfully, until the following weekend. Amy decided she would not let fear stop her normal life. She invited her friend Mark to dinner. After Mark left, she stayed up later than usual watching an old film. Around midnight she heard it again, the scraping across the ground, this time near the driveway. She thought she heard a quiet whistle, like someone whistling a low tune, maybe to calm themselves, maybe mocking. She clutched the blanket, heart thudding. She got up, went to the side door, cracked it a little. The porch light illuminated nothing but the shadow of the tree line. She hesitated, then flicked the light switch. The man stood by the pine, maybe 15 yards away. The crowbar rested on his shoulder. He did not lift it. He just stood and watched. Amy froze again, then slammed the door shut and locked it. She called Mark, voice trembling. They spoke quietly while she stayed hidden under blankets in the living room. Eventually she fell asleep. The next afternoon, the sheriff's deputy knocked on her door. She opened it, coffee cup in hand. The deputy's face was grave. He asked if she had noticed anything missing, broken, disturbed. She said no. He showed her then a picture. They had found footprints in her backyard, boot prints, heavy tread circling toward the tree line, and there were drag marks, indentations in the soft earth as if something heavy had been dragged away into the woods. He asked if she kept anything stored behind the house, tools, old furniture. She said only a small lawnmower and a rusted wheelbarrow. He said they would increase patrols at night, but she should be extra careful. That night, around 2 a.m, the lights went out. The power flickered, then died. Amy grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked to the breaker box in the laundry room. She flipped the switch. Nothing. She felt around the wall and realized there was no safe backup. She went back to the living room and sat, flashlight in hand, watching the window. The whole room felt cold, even though the heat was on low. Then the dragging began, very slowly across the patio, then onto the porch. The door's glass panel rattled. Amy got up, flicked the flashlight beam toward the door. Nothing. Then a blur. Before she could register it, the door handle turned. The door creaked open. Amy shouted. The man entered the porch, barefoot, dragging the crowbar and wearing that mask. He stood there for a long moment, light from the flashlight shining on his pale mask, blank eyes. Then he lifted the crowbar and slammed it into the glass panel. The glass exploded inward. Amy screamed, dropping the flashlight, stumbling backward. She ran down the hall toward the front door. She tried the knob. Locked. Screaming, panicked, she ran into the bedroom where her phone lay on the nightstand, dropped to her knees, dialed 911. In the hallway behind her, she heard slow footsteps. The masked figure entered the living room, dragging the crowbar. The sound of boots on the tile floor echoed. He paused, turned the crowbar slowly, inspecting the cracked door. Amy could hear his breathing, heavy, measured. She thought of diving out the window, but it was too dark, the shrubs too dense. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. 911, what's your emergency? Amy whispered into the phone, voice shaking. Someone's in my house. I'm in the bedroom. He's coming toward me. The footsteps resumed. The masked figure's shadow angled down the hall, his body blocking the light from the living room. The next moment, the door to her bedroom swung open. Amy screamed louder. She scrambled backward, threw the phone aside, grabbed the lamp beside the bed, and swung it. The man's masked face loomed over her. He lifted the crowbar high. Amy closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. Suddenly, bright lights flooded the living room. Police cars with sirens screeching, shining into the windows like blinding stars. The figure at the hall froze. The police shouted commands. The man turned and ran. Amy didn't wait. She darted out the bedroom window, scrambling through the shrubs, boots slipping on wet leaves from night dew, sprinted down the driveway as the sirens closed in. The man vanished into the woods. She watched from the police car, lights flashing as officers searched the pines. They found footprints, the drag marks, and the boot prints heading deeper. They found a makeshift camp, tarp, some blankets, muddy utensils. They found stolen garden tools from neighbors at Willow Creek, a snapshot of the intruder's pattern. But they did not find him that night. In the following days, the town buzzed with whispers. Who was the man in the mask? How long had he been scraping around in the trees across yards? The sheriff's office confirmed several burglaries had been reported around Willow Creek in past months. Tools missing, lawnmowers gone, wires cut. They suspected the masked man had been casing the area for some time. Amy moved out of the house temporarily, staying with Mark until the investigation progressed. She came back after the sheriff's office installed motion sensor floodlights, reinforced locks, and a security system. She also had the trees trimmed back, so the woods no longer pressed up so close to the backyard. Weeks passed. The incident had rattled her, but she attempted to return to normalcy. She resumed her morning walks, though now she stayed near the road rather than venturing far into the woods. At the library, she smiled and greeted patrons, but at night she slept fitfully, waking at every sound. One evening, about 6 weeks after the break-in, she received a letter on plain, papery stationery. No return address. The envelope was heavy, inside a single sheet of paper, written in red ink, messy, jagged handwriting. I'm still here. I never left the woods. You can run, but you cannot hide. Her blood ran cold. She sat at her dining table, lamp lit, reading the words again. Then she flicked off the light, sat in darkness for a moment, feeling the words sink in. She thought of the masked man, the crowbar, the dragging, the breaking of glass. She called the sheriff again. The deputy took the letter, dusted for prints, but found none usable. He told her to keep all the lights on, to not go outside at night alone, and that patrols would increase. But the letter changed something. It wasn't just an intrusion, it was stalking, a terror. The nights grew darker. The sensor lights outside sometimes flashed randomly, but when she checked the footage later, nothing moved. The woods had grown thicker with the typhoon season, leaves sticking to trunks, rustling in the wind. One night, she heard something tapping the window. 3 rapid taps, then a pause, then 2 more. She looked at the monitor. Nothing. She called out, voice trembling, "Who's there?" Silence. Outside, a shadow dissolved into the blackness. She spent the next day researching Tucson, Arizona, cases of stalking. She found stories of stalkers following victims into homes, writing letters, leaving marks. They always said, fear is as much the weapon as any physical violence. Then, late one night, after a storm had rolled through and knocked out power again, Amy woke to a sound at the end of her bed. The house was pitch dark. Only the glow from the security monitor in the living room cast eerie light. She rubbed sleep from her eyes. There it was again, a low whistle, a tune she knew but couldn't place, coming from somewhere under the floor or maybe just outside her window. Her heart pounded. She sat up. The curtains fluttered. The window latch was unlatched. The storm had rattled the frame, but she knew the storm wasn't at fault. She turned on the flashlight on her phone, pointed it toward the window. The latch slipped out of its slot. The window slid upwards slowly. She swallowed hard. The glass didn't break. Light rain from the storm shone on the sill. She backed away. Her phone light flickered off, battery low. She lay back, heart hammering, listening. The window slid quietly the rest of the way open. Rainwater dripped onto the sill. Outside, the masked man's face appeared at the glass, inches away from her. She screamed. The mask flicked off, revealing a pale, gaunt face, hollow-cheeked, eyes dark and hollow. He pointed a finger at her, then motioned his crowbar slowly at his throat, miming a cut, and before she could process, he vanished, back into the woods. Amy collapsed onto the bed, crying silently as the rain thundered outside. Minutes later, the lights came on, power restored. She sat up. She stared at the window, at the latch swinging the wet sill. Next morning, she packed a bag and drove out. She rented an apartment in the next town over, Oakwood, until the case closed. The sheriff's office eventually arrested a suspect several towns over, a transient drifter who'd been living in the woods that breaking into homes in the area. He matched descriptions, had crowbars, his boot tread matched prints found in Amy's yard and others. When he was arrested and taken away in cuffs, Amy felt a hollow victory. The man in the mask was gone, but the fear he planted remained. She returned home after the trial ended, feeling a cautious sense of relief. The house felt safer now. She installed cameras, alarms, new locks, additional lighting. Her morning walks resumed. But every now and then, late at night, she'd hear a scraping outside the house, perhaps just a branch rubbing, perhaps nothing. She'd check the monitor, breathe a sigh of relief, but something in her knew. The woods were watching. Years later, she would tell the story to friends, but every time she paused when telling it, looking at the window in the background, listening, because there was something primal in the way he'd stood at the door, big and masked, silent except for the dragging sound. Something that wasn't about burglary, but about terror. It was about the wilderness pressing into her home, the shadowed woods beyond her yard, the home that should have been safe invaded by a presence that simply wanted to be seen. And in Willow Creek, among the leafy driveways and quiet lanes, people learned to leave lights on, to trim back the trees, to lock their doors for good reason. For sometimes the scariest stories aren't whispered in horror movies. They happen in the homes of people just like you and me. Story, the end. The summer had been unusually hot for rural Missouri, and the kind of heat that doesn't break at night. The air in the cabin, crammed between the pines, felt stifling, heavy. I'd driven in from St. Louis after we found out Gran was gone. My cousin Jenna and I inherited that old wooden place, tucked along a back gravel road about 3 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by tall trees and a narrow creek that ran murky and quiet. Gran had passed just a month earlier, and the will said we had 6 weeks to claim the place before it reverted to the county. So I arrived with 2 duffel bags, an old dog, and the sense of something wrong I couldn't shake. From the moment I pulled up the drive, the cabin looked changed. I'd been out here as a kid many times. Gran would sit on the screen porch in a rocking chair with a glass of iced tea, and we'd catch lightning bugs when dusk arrived. But now the screen door sagged, the paint on the siding was peeling, the windows grimy. A curtain in one of the upstairs bedrooms hung limp and stained. The day was bright, the sun high in the sky, yet the woods around the cabin seemed shaded, somber. Goose flesh prickled on my forearms without a breeze. Jenna didn't arrive until later that evening. She'd flown in from Chicago, suitcase in tow, an expression of tired excitement plastered across her face. She hugged me, kept talking about how this would be our summer. Think of it. Cabin by the woods, no rent, fresh air, a little getaway from city noise. I wanted to believe her, but I also felt the cabin watching me. We spent the first night unpacking, drinking cheap beer on the porch and listening to the night sounds, cicadas buzzing, an owl's call deep in the forest, branches scraping like fingernails against the roof. Our old dog, Rufus, wouldn't settle. He laid near the back door and kept one eye open. When we went to bed, I woke twice to a scraping sound on the porch. It might have been a branch, but it came again and again, slow, deliberate. I couldn't tell if it was outside or maybe the screen door shifting in its frame. The next morning, I went inside the cabin proper to inspect things. The floorboards creaked more than I remembered. Gran's furniture was still in place. Her quilt on the bed, her knitting basket in the living room, the radio on a shelf though the cord had been unplugged. I dusted a photo of her and her late husband smiling on that porch decades ago. I felt a sadness, but also a tightening in my chest. The kind of feeling you get when you know you're not quite alone. We decided to clean the place up. Jenna pulled weeds outside, I scrubbed windows and vacuumed inside. As I cleaned the upstairs bedroom, I noticed scuff marks on the hardwood beside the baseboard near the window, like someone had dragged something heavy. The window latch was loose. I tightened it. I found tiny scratch marks on the sill, as though claws or maybe a tool made them. My mind tried to argue they were years old, maybe from kids climbing in or out. But the marks seemed fresh, sharp. That night we cooked dinner and sat at the dining table. The light bulb flickered once. There was a hum in the wires, I told myself, but then the radio on the shelf clicked on of its own accord. We heard static, one beat of an old country song, then static again. I got up and unplugged it, and the static stopped. Old wiring, I said. Jenna shrugged it off. But I saw it in her eyes too. She was unsettled. Over the next few days, the oddities mounted. Rufus started growling in his sleep, barking at walls. He wouldn't go out the back door after dusk. We found muddy footprints on the porch late one night. Boot prints, small size, not mine or hers. The pattern looked military, deep treads. We found no one there when we looked, but the footprints started at the stairs and ended by the door. Jenna insisted it was just the neighbors hunting or something. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. One afternoon, I went down to the creek behind the cabin to wash off grime. The banks were slippery, the water shallow. I noticed something half sunken on the far side, a red rubber ball, maybe 15 years old, its color gone dull, stuck to a small tree root. It looked out of place. I waded across and retrieved it, rinsed it under clear water. On its surface, someone had scratched letters, J plus R 1978. That was the kind of toy my father might have owned. And below the tree root, I found a rusted axe head. Half buried in the mud, its handle long gone, the head stained with rust that looked fresh in places. I brought it back and laid it in the garage. That night, I dreamt of that red ball rolling down the creek, a child chasing it, laughter echoing. I woke hearing that laughter. I bolted upright in bed to silence, but all I heard was the wind outside. My body trembled. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves. Then the phone rang. It was the sheriff's department. A local man had reported theft of several firearms from a shed a few miles down the road, and footprints matching ours had been found near his property. He came by the next day to show us photos. The shoe tread pattern on the dirt matched what we'd seen on our porch. We told him we'd been at the cabin each evening. He asked if we kept any weapons on site. We did not. He suggested we secure the property. We thanked him and said we would. That night I slept with the bedroom door locked. Jenna insisted on sleeping downstairs. The house sounds had gotten worse. Tapping on windows, doors lightly closing, heavy breathing outside the window. At one point we both woke hearing footsteps, heavy, booted, outside the living room. The wood floor creaked as though someone shifted on the porch. We looked at each other. I picked up a flashlight and opened the front door. The porch was empty, moonlight casting long shadows among the pines. I shone the beam onto the yard. Nothing but trees. Yet I felt watched. Over the next week, we attempted to lock down the cabin. New locks, motion sensor lights outside. The boot prints came again. 2 nights ago, they appeared on the snow. We had a cold snap. We saw them at 2:14 a.m., starting at the back door, going around the corner of the cabin, then disappearing into the woods. The sensor lights did not go off. They never did. It felt as though whoever walked there knew exactly how to stay out of range. I told Jenna I wanted to leave, but she argued we had to salvage this investment and make it our summer. Then, one evening after dinner, Jenna showed me something she found, a notebook, tucked behind a panel in the kitchen wall. She pulled the board off, and we found a slim leather-bound volume. It looked old. Its pages were yellowed. Inside were scribbles, dates and names, things like March 9th, 1978, John found her in the creek, and August 14th, 1982, the mark remains. The entries were cryptic. Some pages had drawings, a child's face, hollow eyes, and a jagged symbol that looked like a circle with 3 lines descending. I asked Jenna where she found it. She said she'd been pulling out some boards to get a stronger Wi-Fi signal, and the wall gave way. We flipped through more pages. At the back was a photo, black and white, of a family standing on the porch of the cabin. 2 adults, a boy maybe 10, a girl maybe 8. The date printed, 1949. The house looked slightly different. On the back of the photo, someone had handwritten the children's names, Mary and John. I sat there holding the photo. The girls' eyes in that picture were strange, dark, glassy. I felt sweat on my temples. I told Jenna we should call the local historian or something, maybe research the house. She nodded, but her face looked pale. That night, we didn't sleep. Shortly after midnight, the power flickered. The lights in the cabin buzzed and dimmed. At the same moment, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Maybe from the attic fan, except the attic fan wasn't running. The whine crescendoed into a scream that echoed through the walls and immersed me in a ringing sound so loud I clamped my hands over my ears. The dog barked violently. The walls felt like they were vibrating. Then, just as quickly, everything stopped. The lights steadied. The door downstairs flew open with a boom. Jenna screamed. I grabbed her and we rushed down into the living room. The door was swinging, wind whipping through. I slammed it shut. We locked it. I asked, "What was that?" She shook. I didn't have an answer. In the morning, I went to the attic. The hatch was loose. It looked like someone had forced it open, marks on the wooden frame. The floor held footprints, small size, bare feet, dusty. I measured them, length about 9 inches, child size. But the boot prints I saw outside were large, 8.5 inches, deep tread, adult size. 2 different sets of intruders? I felt sick. I posted pictures to my phone, sent them to the sheriff's department. He told me he'd swing by later in the week. I tried to research the notebook. In the county archives, I learned the previous owner of the cabin was a man named Harold Mackenzie. He purchased the property in 1942 and lived there with his wife, Ellen, and their 2 children, John and Mary. They moved away in 1983 under unexplained circumstances. Neighbors reported the family disappeared overnight. Search parties found nothing. They left the lights on. The car was gone from the gravel drive. Some said the children went missing in the woods. Others said the father killed his wife and son. The records were inconclusive. I sat in the local library, flipping through faded newspapers. One headline from 1978, "Boy missing in woods near Kettle Creek Road." The location matched our address loosely. The boy was John Mackenzie, age 12. He vanished while playing near the creek. Witnesses claimed they heard his screams but found no body. There was talk of a dark figure seen standing near his favorite hideaway. I shivered. The notebook mention of John found her in the creek now made sense, but found who? Mary? I found a second article, 1982, girl found dead, Mary Mackenzie's body recovered from creek bed. It said Mary, aged 16, was found near tree roots, red rubber ball nearby. The ball looked exactly like the one I retrieved. Photo evidence showed the same ball pattern. My stomach dropped. The rusted axe head was probably hers, or something she dropped. I snapped the picture of that ball, returned to the cabin. I shared the research with Jenna when she came in from town. Her face changed color. "We should leave," she whispered. I agreed. We packed our bags that evening and stayed in the town motel. But before we left, we decided to gather our things. On leaving the cabin about 11 p.m., the woods were silent, too silent. Rufus refused to leave. I carried him out. As I reached the porch step, I turned and looked back. In the upstairs bedroom window, I saw a pale face. A girl's face, hair long and hanging limp, standing motionless, not moving. I gasped. I grabbed Jenna's arm and pointed. She threw her flashlight at the window. Beam flickered on the figure, but it vanished. The room was empty. We ran to the truck. The next morning, we told the sheriff. He arrived with 2 deputies, searched the house. They found nothing conclusive. No intruder, no broken entry, no sign of forced entry besides the attic hatch. He made notes about our boot prints that didn't match the child prints upstairs. He suggested the possibility of a trespasser, maybe a hunter using our address as hideaway. But I saw something else in his eyes, skepticism and fear. We stayed at the motel that night. At 2:13 a.m., the fire alarm in the motel hallway screeched. Smoke, no visible smoke. The air cold. We rushed to the window. Outside, the woods glowed with a strangely orange mist. It didn't make sense. We ran to the car. I started the engine. The cabin's outline was visible in the distance. Through the windshield, I saw movement near the porch, small figure dashing behind a tree. It disappeared into a blur of white. We left. Over the next few weeks, the cabin remained ours on paper, but we refused to go back. The sheriff kept the file open. We retained the photo of the girl, the rusted axe head, the notebook with sketches. I lay awake nights thinking of those children. John missing in 1978, Mary dead in 1982. Their father silent, the mother gone. Something in those woods had claimed them, something we disturbed. Late one night I received a call. It was from the sheriff. They'd returned to the cabin at dawn. They found footprints again, boot prints by the back door, the sensor light pulled out of its housing, wires cut, the attic hatch open. Nothing inside but that same red ball, placed on the floor, clean and bright, now, as if someone polished it. The ball we had taken, it had been returned. I asked the sheriff, "Do you think someone's living there?" He said he didn't know. The prints were fresh, but no sign of habitation. He suggested moving permanently. We agreed. That fall, I returned one last time to the cabin to collect remaining documents. I parked the car, walked the path to the back where the creek lay. The day was gray, the forest quiet. As I came near the creek, I heard humming. Faint, childlike singing carried by the wind. Let's play. Let's play. I froze, my breath short. The red rubber ball lay half hidden between the roots where I'd found it. I picked it up. On the ball, someone had scratched a new message. Come back. My hand trembled. I dropped the ball and backed away. The humming grew louder, echoing in the trees. I looked up. Near the opposite bank, I saw a girl in white, long hair, barefoot, standing thigh deep in the water. Her head tilted, eyes fixed on me. The color drained from my face. I couldn't move. I called Jenna. No answer. I hollered the dog's name. Nothing. The girl raised a hand and pointed to the forest. I turned and ran. When I reached the car, I yanked open the door. Rufus jumped in, tail tucked between legs. I locked the doors and tore down the dirt road, tires kicking dust into the air. I didn't look back. We sold the cabin shortly after to a local investor who assured us he'd bring in historians and renovate. We asked for him to leave the woods intact and secure the property. We signed the papers. But sometimes I awake at night and feel that tapping on the window, or I see footprints in my dreams. A memory of that face in the window. Months later, I heard a news brief. The owner of the cabin fired the workers. They left saying they heard echoes of children laughing at dusk near the creek, a figure walking in the windows, lights turning on and off. The property sat empty again. I don't know what haunted that place, if it was the souls of 2 children trapped or something older. But I know this. Some old houses aren't empty, even when people move out. Some woods don't let go of what they've taken. And sometimes the past reaches out through a red rubber ball or a rusted axe head to remind you that you trespassed. Years later, I went to therapy for nightmares. One recurring dream, a child dragging a red ball through the woods toward me, the ball leaving prints in the mud, the ball watching me roll. I wake wincing, heart pounding. Rufus is gone now, old age, but I found an old photo of him on that porch with me as a child, and behind us you can barely see the cabin window. In the window, there is a shape, a faint silhouette. Once I asked Jenna if she ever saw anything after we moved. She said yes, a shadow at O'Hare Airport, waiting by baggage claim. A girl's silhouette, long hair, white dress, red ball in hand, staring at her before vanishing. I laughed, nervously, and hung up. I'll never go back to Missouri. That summer changed me. I learned that not every problem has a rational explanation. The footprints, the hutch in the wall, the ball, the attic hatch, they were tangible. The fear was real. And sometimes I feel certain the forest still holds them, John's disappearance, Mary's death, the father's silence. All of it tied into that cabin we tried to make ours. When the red ball arrived in my dream tonight, I didn't pick it up. I let it roll down the hallway, vanish through the door, and I locked it behind me. I won't answer that knock on the window again. Story, the end. Jake Corbett's mother smiles the way she always did. Warm, laughing eyes, a restful ease in her expression, as though the weight of the world sits somewhere far away, behind a thin curtain, rather than pressing in on her shoulders. In the small town of Peyton Ridge, Ohio, that warmth was a constant anchor. Jake, now 23, remembers that smile even as the nightmares press in, memories shifting and sliding until he wonders if they even happened at all. It was late November when the chill arrived, slipping through the trees and settling into the bones. Peyton Ridge had a modest population, tucked in between miles of cornfields and hardwood forest, and on the edge of town lay the old Hunter farm. The farmhouse had been vacant for nearly 2 years after the elderly Mrs. Hunter moved into an assisted living community in Cincinnati. Jake and his friends treated it like a dare. Go up, walk through at midnight, see if the old husk creaked, see what you found in the attic. It was harmless, they told themselves. Jake's group consisted of him, his best friend Marcus Lane, and Marcus's younger sister Lila, 18, defiant, curious. The night they went, they brought flashlights, cheap soda, a case of beer, nervous jokes. They parked the truck at the gravel driveway, tires crunching under oak leaves, the house a dark silhouette under the moon. Inside the entryway, the air was stale and heavy. Wood floorboards groaned. They explored the ground floor, found dusty furniture, peeling wallpaper, a ballroom-sized room on the side that must once have been used for gatherings. But no one found anything remarkable, just the hum of emptiness. It was in the attic that things shifted. Jake climbed the ladder into a space where the roof pitched sharply, dust motes floating in the flashlight beam. There were old trunks, a broken rocking horse, stacks of yellowed photographs, and a cardboard carton. He picked up one, blew off the dust. It showed Mrs. Hunter in a younger version of herself, posed on the porch of the same house, but the porch looked freshly painted, the lawn bright. Someone else stood, a man, half in the photo's edge. Jake flipped it over. G.W. Hunter, 1946, in slanted cursive. He slid his flashlight across the attic and paused. On the far wall, near the corner, something glinted. He approached, shining the light, and discovered a small trap door, the hinges rusted. He pried it open and a chill, older than anything else in the house, exhaled. Inside was a tunnel, narrow and dark, disappearing into the ground. Jake's pulse raced. He pointed his light into it, flickered the beam, nothing but black. Lila whistled softly behind him. Marcus lit a cigarette and blew out the smoke in a small cloud. "What do you think that is?" Lila asked. Jake swallowed, his voice faint. "I don't know." They descended. The tunnel dropped maybe 6 feet, then stretched horizontally, the beam of the flashlight narrowing until you could just make out the walls. Stone, slick and cold, damp. The air smelled of wet earth and decay. They moved slowly, the only sounds their breathing and the distant drip of water. Then Marcus stopped. "Did you hear that?" he asked. At first nothing, then a distant scrape, like something being dragged across wood or stone. Jake froze. Lila's breath came in shallow bursts. The tunnel ahead turned a corner. They held up their lights and crept forward. What they discovered was more than they bargained for. Several rooms carved out of the rock, stacked one above the other. Wooden beams supported ceiling joists. In one room lay rusted chains bolted into the floor. In another, a long stretch of faint markings scratched into the wall, something written but eroded. The flashlight revealed partial letters. No. Give, something like he. They stepped into one of the rooms and the beam lit up an object, a battered doll, missing one eye, its dress stained. Lila recoiled. "Let's go," she hissed. But Marcus shook his head. "Wait, look over there." He pointed at a ledge. They climbed carefully to it and found a crude journal, leather-bound, yellow pages fragile. Jake opened it with gloved fingers. The writing was cramped. November 1946. He will not stop. The screams echo through the walls. Page after page described voices, shadows, crawling things beneath the ground. The writer called himself George Hunter. The last full entry said, "The tunnel gave up something last night. It came up through the floor. I don't know how much longer we can keep him down." At that moment, a sudden low moan echoed from somewhere deep in the tunnel, so soft it might have been imagined, but the hairs along Jake's neck stood up. The chains at the floor rattled faintly. The beam of the flashlight flickered. Marcus's cigarette fell to the ground, the ash smoking. Lila backed away. "We're done," she said. They scrambled back, up the ladder, breathing heavy. The attic seemed more oppressive once they emerged. Outside, the moon was hidden by cloud, wind skittered leaves across the porch. They heard a faint bang from somewhere inside the house. Footsteps, maybe? Jake froze, stared at the blank entryway. Then the door slammed shut with force. They ran to it together, shoved it open, cold air hit their faces, and they stumbled out. Back at the truck, they raced down the driveway, hearts pounding. They didn't speak. Marcus didn't smoke again. The house receded behind them until it was just a dark figure. They got back to town in silence. Once at Marcus's driveway, they all got out, hardly looking at each other. "I'm never doing that again," Lila whispered. Jake nodded. He went home and sat in bed for hours, the image of the tunnel walls and the doll and the chain configuration flickering through his mind. Eventually, he fell asleep. In the days afterward, something changed for Jake. He'd wake up at 3:13 a.m., always 3:13, shake thick and cold, a sound outside his window though the blinds were closed. Sometimes he'd dream of the doll in the attic, but the doll would whisper his name. At breakfast, he'd catch a glimpse of the attic window of the farmhouse as he drove to work and feel a stabbing fear. Marcus and Lila stopped inviting him. Lila wouldn't answer texts. Marcus looked at him like he was a stranger. He started investigating. He surfed the local library archives, old county records. He found that George William Hunter and his wife Mercy lived in that house from 1946 until 1951. Mrs. Hunter left after George died of unknown causes. The records mentioned unnatural death for George, but no more detail. There were rumors in the town. Children heard screams in the night. Livestock vanished from the farm. Old woodsmen said they shied away from the land. Jake made phone calls to older residents. One man told him about hearing muffled sobbing in the house when he mowed the adjacent field decades ago. Another recalled the flicker of lights when the house should have been dark. The more Jake learned, the worse he felt. And then the incidents escalated. One night around Christmas, Jake was staying over at his girlfriend Emma's place. He dozed off around midnight, but woke disoriented, sweat on his brow. Across the room, in the corner by the window, something stood. A figure of a child, naked, shivering, its face pale and blank. The flashlight beam in his hand hovered. He thought it was an illusion and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the figure was gone. The window's curtain fluttered though the blinds were sealed. Emma woke. "What? Jake, you're shaking." "I thought something." She dismissed it as stress. But Jake couldn't sleep that night. His mind replayed the attic, the diatribes in the journal, the moan in the tunnel. He drove home at dawn, holding the steering wheel tight, seeing the tree lines pass in rhythm. The next morning at work, oddities. His computer screen flickered, showing a shape in the corner of the desktop background. He'd brush it off. At home, in his apartment, he'd hear chains dragging, breathing behind the walls. He changed apartments, changed jobs. Nothing relieved the sensation that something followed him. Late one evening, he resolved to confront it. He drove back to the farm, alone. The moonlight was full and bright. He parked at the edge of the driveway. His breath plumed in the air. The house looked the same, but changed. The attic windows glowed faintly, the darkness inside deeper than expected. He pulled his phone out. Its light was weak. He told himself he'd go up, find the trapdoor, destroy whatever was there, end it. He rang the doorbell. No answer. He walked around to the side porch, opened the unlocked door with a slow creak. He climbed the stairs, through the house, into the attic, the ladder rattling under his weight. He reached the trapdoor again. He hesitated, then opened it. The tunnel beckoned. Jake switched to his phone light, took a deep breath, and stepped in. He tripped once, caught himself, kept going. The beam slid across the walls. He looked back once. The attic floor hatch was overhead, yawning black. Then he heard a voice, a whisper, distant but unmistakable. "Jake." The sound was like his mother's voice, but slow and broken. His heart shot. He turned the phone to focus ahead, and there, on one of the beams, scratched in fresh letters with something reddish, "Finally." He felt the air drop in temperature. The flashlight flickered and died. Panic screamed in his mind, and he fumbled for the phone to restart it. The beam came back, weak, and in the beam's edge something moved. A childlike shape, face half in shadow, reached out. He screamed and turned to run, but the floor behind him collapsed in part, wood splintering. He slid downward into darkness. When he came to, he was lying on his back in the tunnel, chest rising fast, the stones pressing in, and somewhere above him he heard a slow scrape. He looked ahead, and the walls seemed wet, veins of dark brown moisture seeping. The flashlight was smashed. Only a faint red glow came from his dying phone battery. He crawled forward, hands raw, until the tunnel forked and two sets of old metallic stairs led upward. He climbed the right side, emerging into another attic space, one he hadn't seen before. This attic room was furnished. Chairs, a dining table, a rocking horse. On the wall hung a portrait of Mrs. Hunter, but something about the eyes disturbed him, the way they glared. He moved away, and in the corner the doll with one eye sat rocking. Suddenly a voice from behind him, "Welcome back." Jake wheeled around, but no one there. The rocking horse's ears twitched. He stood frozen. The figure he isolated was the man from the photo he found months earlier, George Hunter. He looked older, gaunt, his eyes hollow pits. He smiled a thin line. The temperature dropped further. The room's light dimmed. "You found the door," George said quietly, "and now you're mine." Jake backed up. The floor shook slightly. The ceiling warped. The portrait on the wall's eyes slanted. He turned to leave the door, but the table leg snapped, and he fell. In that moment, the doll lunged, its eye socket empty. A hand detached. It rolled toward him. He scrambled and hit the rocking horse, which tipped over. The window shattered. Glass shards flew. But when he looked out, the moon was gone and the air outside had blurred, as though the house existed outside normal space. He leapt through the broken window, landing hard on the ground below, jagged, cold, and dashed back to his truck. He drove away, speed high, lights blurring. He didn't stop until he reached the highway, gas station lights a blur. Back in his apartment, he collapsed. The nightmares intensified after that. Voices in the walls peeling in shapes of bodies, chains dragging across concrete. He hallucinated. The doll, the portrait, the man. His work suffered. Emma left. One night he received a package. Inside was the small one-eyed doll, identical to the one in the attic, mailed from an unknown address. A note was inside. "Thank you for opening the door." The edges were stained dark. He threw it in the fire. The doll melted in grotesque shapes, but as it did, he saw the profile of George Hunter's face in the charred remains. He considered leaving town, but the tunnel was inside him now. The house, the voices, had attached themselves. Sleep was terror. His reflection changed. His mother called, "Jake, are you okay?" He lied. "I'm fine." But at night she dreamt of him calling from the dark farm. Then one night he got a call from Lila. She sounded frantic. "Jake, you need to come," she whispered. "It's Marcus. He's gone." Jake drove back to Peyton Ridge. He found police at the Hunter farm. Marcus's body had been found in the tunnel. They called it suicide, though the chains in the rock-carved room were wrapped around his neck. His eyes were wide, with shock, his mouth open. No note. The entrance hatch was open. The town whispered. They said maybe the haunted farm got to him. Maybe the tunnel drove him mad. Jake felt hollow. He thought of the journal entry of crawl through the floor. Soon, people in town reported odd occurrences. Flickering attic windows in the house, distant sobs, lights in the forest well after midnight. The house stayed unoccupied. For Jake, the terror didn't end. One night, he woke at 3:13 a.m. again. The whisper. The chains. He sat up. His phone was ringing, caller ID blank. He answered and heard nothing but breathing. Then a faint, childlike giggle. He hung up. The next morning, he went to his mother's house. She hugged him awkwardly, noticed his rings of dark under his eyes. He didn't tell her what happened. He couldn't. The farm had changed him. He gave notice at work and packed his things, deciding to leave town. He had to escape. He returned to the farmhouse once more, this time daylight. The attic hatch still open. He climbed in, looked down the tunnel, but something inside him said, "This is beyond you." He closed the hatch, locked it, poured concrete into the shaft as best he could, trying to bury it. Months passed. He moved into a new city, got a new apartment. Life seemed possible again. He stopped waking at 3:13. He rebuilt friendships. But in his dreams, the forest of Peyton Ridge stood and the light of the farmhouse glowed. The doll flickered in his mind. Then one evening he opened his apartment door, and there it was, the one-eyed doll, sitting on his doorstep. His stomach knotted. He picked it up carefully. Its seams were clean. No note this time. He placed it inside. Lights went out in the building. Down the hallway, faint tapping. He set the doll on the couch and left the apartment for a moment. When he returned, the doll sat on his bed next to him, facing his pillow. He didn't scream. He just turned on the light and picked it up. One eye socket empty, the other glassy, reflecting his own face. He realized the house, the tunnel, the man, they never left. They followed him. The threshold between reality and something else had broken when he opened the door. At that moment, he understood. Sometimes true horrors don't wait for midnight dares. They wait for moments of foolishness, curiosity, and we invite them in. He shut off the light, stared into the darkness, the doll's empty eye refusing to blink. The floorboards of his apartment creaked. Wind fluttered the curtains, though the window was shut, and somewhere, deep beneath the earth, chains rattled. Story the end. On a crisp November night in rural Ohio, nestled deep in the forested outskirts of a small town, the old farmhouse stood solitary and still. The wind whispered through the bare trees, bending their boughs against the windows. Inside, 28-year-old Ben Miller had lived alone for nearly a year. He was a quiet man, an accountant by trade, who had retreated from city life after a painful divorce. The house he had moved into once belonged to his grandparents. It was a bit run down, but charming, far from neighbors, far from noise. That night he was curled up on the couch, a blanket pulled over his legs, the TV quietly humming in the background as he sipped tea. Outside, the darkness enveloped the surrounding yard and forest alike. He felt secure in his solitude until he didn't. About 1:13 a.m., his dog, an older golden retriever named Jasper, let out a low, persistent growl. Ben stiffened. Jasper sat up, ears perked, staring at the large window that looked out onto the clearing in front of the house. The TV screen flickered in the dim room, and the wind sounded louder than usual, rattling the window panes. Ben set his mug down and turned off the TV. The house suddenly too silent. He stepped over to the window and peered outside. At first he saw nothing, merely shadows shifting among the trees. Then something moved in the brush. A tall figure, slender, wearing dark clothing, lurched into the clearing, dragging something heavy across the frozen ground. Ben caught a glint of metal, a crowbar perhaps, before the figure sank back into shadow. Jasper began barking loudly, an urgent sound tearing through the stillness. Ben panicked for a moment and retreated. He locked the front door, bolted the deadbolt, then backed away, his heart thudding. He whispered into the phone to the sheriff's dispatch, not yet 911, because he told himself if it was just a wandering animal, he didn't want to create a false alarm. I think there's someone outside my house, he said, voice muffled. I live at 79 Maple Ridge Road, Jackson County. He watched from the darkness as the porch light flickered. Then the figure emerged onto the porch, dragging the heavy barbell-sized metal rod behind him. Ben's breath froze in his chest. The masked intruder placed the tool down, raised the flashlight beam across the window toward where Ben stood. He screamed, the flashlight beam illuminating a face masked in black. The intruder stood motionless, staring at the house, then turned and ambled away into the forest. Ben hung up the phone. He barely slept. Morning arrived, pale and lifeless, frozen frost clinging to the grass. The sheriff's deputies arrived, took pictures of the drag marks, metal rod, footprints. They told Ben they'd patrol the area regularly for the next few nights, and that the intruder was likely an opportunist casing houses for easy access. Ben attempted to return to normal the next night. He put the TV on, locked all doors, closed the curtains, and let Jasper sleep in his bed. But sleep came fitfully. At 3:42 a.m., the power went out. The whole house darkened. Ben fumbled for his phone's flashlight, heart pounding. Then the heavy scraping noise again, this time behind the house, where the old barn leaned and the woods pressed in close. Jasper whimpered. Ben grabbed his phone and crept toward the back door. He looked through the glass and saw the figure entering the barn, using the beam of a flashlight. The barn door was old and creaked when it opened. The figure stepped inside, silhouette bending over something heavy, hoisting it toward the door. The beam swept across the space and locked onto the doorway. Ben stumbled back, flicking off the light. He moved to his bedroom, called 911 this time, "Someone's inside my outbuilding. Please hurry." The dispatcher assured him someone was on the way. Ben crouched beneath his blankets, listening. Somewhere in the house, the floorboards creaked. The wind moaned. The intruder didn't approach the house itself, but Ben could hear the barn's door groan. Then footsteps, heavy, moving away. When dawn broke, the deputies returned. They found the barn door pried open, old farm equipment dragged outside, a broken window in the barn side wall, but no suspect. They recommended Ben install motion sensors and cameras. Ben did so. He bought a system, installed external floodlights facing the bush line. 2 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., the system triggered. The floodlights flashed and harsh shadows danced across the yard. The camera recorded a dark shape scaling the fence at the edge of the woods. The intruder froze in the beam, then bolted toward the tree line. The footage ended there. Ben reviewed it in the morning with the sheriff. They enhanced the image. A tall man, black hoodie, metal rod in hand. The sheriff suggested it might be the same person as the first night. That afternoon, Ben found a note slipped under his front door, a rough scrap of paper with red-inked writing. "You're lucky the lights came on first. I'll be back when you sleep." The handwriting shaky. The red ink smudged. His stomach turned. This was no longer just burglary. This was terror. Ben moved temporarily to stay with his sister in town for a week. He left his home dark, cameras running. On his return, he found the driveway tire marks. Someone had driven a small truck across the yard, leaving fresh prints in the mud. He reported it. The final incident came one night when he returned home late. He parked in the driveway, walked up to the front door, and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He heard the porch light click on. He paused, turned, and what he saw drew the breath out of him. The intruder standing at the far end of the driveway, the floodlights pointed at him. A crowbar-like rod in his hand. He froze. The intruder raised one finger to his lips as if to say, "Shh," then dropped the rod and turned, walking away into the woods, disappearing. Ben never called the sheriff in time to catch him. The intruder left the property that night, quietly, without entering the house. But the message was clear. In the weeks that followed, Ben sold the old farmhouse. He moved into a small apartment in town, closer to neighbors, closer to help. The cameras stayed. Jasper found a new routine. Ben still wakes sometimes at night, startled by shadows or the creak of a door. He never wants to feel as vulnerable again. Because when someone invades your safe place, when they stand at the edge of your home and watch while you sleep, they don't need to break the door to own your fear. Story the end. It started in the small town of Millers Creek, West Virginia, a place so quiet it was easy to forget it existed, except when you had to pass through on the way to somewhere else. The town was surrounded by thick forests and old coal mines long abandoned, mines whose entrances had been boarded up decades ago, but which locals whispered were never truly empty. In the fall of 2012, a young couple, Ryan and Emily Lawson, decided to rent a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. They weren't thrill seekers, they just wanted peace, away from the noise of the city. But the cabin they found had a reputation they didn't know. The owner, a wiry old man named Mr. Carter, had warned them about wandering at night, but they brushed it off as small-town superstition. The cabin was off a winding dirt road at the edge of the forest, with a view of the mountains in the distance. It was rustic but cozy, the kind of place with a wood stove and a porch swing. The first night, everything seemed normal. Ryan made a fire while Emily unpacked. Outside, the wind rattled the trees, but it was soothing. Then Ryan noticed something odd. Footprints in the snow leading from the tree line toward the cabin, though no one else was supposed to be there. They were large, irregular, not like any animal he had seen. Emily laughed it off, probably a deer or a raccoon. He wanted to believe her, so he did. At midnight, the first strange sound came, a rhythmic tapping, like a hammer or a claw hitting wood somewhere in the trees. Ryan looked out the window and saw nothing, only the shadows of branches swaying. Emily was asleep. He went outside to investigate, holding a flashlight. The snow crunched under his boots and the tapping stopped as soon as he stepped off the porch. He scanned the tree line. Then he saw it. A figure, pale and unnaturally thin, standing among the trees. Its face was indistinct, blurred as though the wind moved it faster than the eye could follow. Ryan froze, heart pounding. Then the figure stepped backward and disappeared into the darkness. He ran back inside and locked the doors. The next morning, the sun revealed more of the oddities. The snow around the cabin was full of footprints, but these weren't from the previous night. They were larger than any humans, some with 6 toes, some dragging behind them in a strange pattern. Ryan showed them to Emily, who felt her stomach twist. They considered leaving, but decided to stay one more night. That evening, while Emily cooked, Ryan went to gather firewood. He stepped off the trail and into the woods, and the tapping started again. Soft at first, like a fingernail on bark, then louder all around him. His flashlight caught glimpses of movement, branches swaying though the wind was calm, shadows that moved independently of the trees. Then he heard a whisper, barely audible, "Get out!" He spun, but no one was there. Panic surged. He ran back to the cabin, tripping over roots, breath ragged. When he burst inside, Emily had already heard it. The whisper, faint, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. She pressed herself against him, trembling. They tried to sleep, but couldn't. In the middle of the night, a loud thud shook the cabin. Something heavy had hit the roof. The snow outside had been undisturbed in the fall, yet now there were deep grooves in the snow, leading toward the tree line. Ryan grabbed his hunting rifle, Emily holding his arm, and they went to the porch. The grooves led away into the woods. For hours, they watched nothing, but every so often the snow would shift, and the tapping would start again. By the morning of the 3rd day, Emily refused to stay. Ryan reluctantly agreed. They packed quickly, but when Ryan went to start the truck, it wouldn't turn over. He tried the keys repeatedly. Then he saw footprints in the snow, leading from the forest to the truck, circling it, and stopping at the driver's side door. 6-toed prints, large, uneven, and impossibly deep. Panic set in. Emily screamed when something brushed against the window from outside. Ryan got out to see, rifle in hand, and found nothing. Just the snow, perfect and untouched beyond the strange footprints. Finally, after what seemed like hours, the truck started. They drove away, the woods behind them silent, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even on the main road, the unease followed. Ryan kept checking the rear view. Shadows flitted along the tree line, glimpsed for an instant, then gone. By the time they reached the first gas station in town, the sun had risen fully, and they told themselves it was over. They returned to Miller's Creek the next weekend to collect their belongings. They'd left some clothes behind in their haste. The cabin was empty, but there were no footprints, no grooves in the snow, no signs of anything unusual. It was as though the terror had never been there. Mr. Carter greeted them warmly, acting as if nothing had happened. They packed quickly, but Emily refused to look at the woods. Weeks later, Ryan began receiving phone calls from an unknown number. Each time, silence. One night, the tapping started in his apartment, soft at first, then louder. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, and when he looked out the window, the woods from the cabin had somehow appeared behind the apartment building. The shadows moved. He woke Emily, but she refused to see it, thinking it stress or PTSD. Then one morning, Ryan opened his mailbox and found a small package, snow inside, frozen, with a note, "We will follow." Ryan and Emily moved to another state, but the incidents continued, always subtle at first. Whispers, tapping, shadows in the corner of the eye. In one particularly chilling episode, Emily awoke to find 6-toed footprints circling her bed. They were shallow, as if pressed lightly, but real. Ryan tried to photograph them, but the camera showed nothing. They left their apartment again. Wherever they went, the forest seemed to follow, edges of their vision filled with pale, thin figures moving just out of focus. By the end of 2014, Ryan was hospitalized for severe anxiety, Emily too terrified to leave the house. Friends reported seeing shadows moving behind the windows when they visited. The authorities dismissed it as stress, paranoia, or delusions, but Ryan and Emily knew better. Every night, the tapping came. Every night, the whisper, "We will follow." And in the darkness, sometimes the figures would come closer, just far enough away to avoid detection, watching. Ryan once confided in a local folklorist who told him of the old mines, long abandoned, which were said to house the lost ones, spirits or creatures that had been trapped underground, never leaving, always waiting for intruders. No one had ever returned fully sane after encountering them. The folklorist's eyes widened when Ryan described the 6-toed footprints. They call them the crawlers, he whispered. They don't leave until you die, or they take someone you love first. Ryan never told Emily what the folklorist said. He didn't need to. She already knew. Every night, the whispers grew, the tapping nearer, the shadows lengthened, objects moved in their home, the forest never left. No matter how far they moved, they would see it, hear it, feel it at the edge of perception. Then, in December of 2015, Ryan disappeared. Emily woke to find the apartment door wide open, the faint smell of wet earth inside, and no sign of Ryan. Police searched but found nothing. Only the tapping continued, soft at first, then growing louder. She never recovered him. Months later, the police received a call, a child's voice, whispering Ryan's name, coming from the forest near the original cabin in Miller's Creek. When they investigated, there was nothing, just the old snow-covered cabin, empty, as if it had never been touched. Footprints in the snow led from the forest to the cabin, 6 toes, irregular, dragging slightly. Emily moved again, alone. She stopped answering calls, stopped telling anyone where she went. Sometimes neighbors hear the soft tapping in her apartment at night. Sometimes a pale, thin figure appears at the corner of their windows. The whisper follows, and always in the dark, she feels it. The crawlers are waiting, patient, knowing she cannot escape. She sleeps with lights on. She never opens doors at night, and yet the tapping continues. Story the end. The summer of 1997 had been relentless in rural Pennsylvania. The kind of heat that presses down so heavily you can hear it in the trees. My brother, Mike, and I had driven up from Pittsburgh to check on our late Uncle Harold's property, a small abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of a forest near Clearfield County. The house had been in the family for generations, and Uncle Harold had died alone the year before, his body found weeks after neighbors reported the smell. The will left the house to Mike and me, with a note that said simply, "Take care of it, but respect the woods." The house looked worse than I remembered from childhood visits. The porch sagged under the weight of years, paint peeling in long strips, the windows grimy with dust and spider webs. I remember thinking it seemed to be holding its breath. Mike shrugged it off. "It's just old," he said. "We'll clean it up, make it livable." Our first night was silent, except for the forest. Cicadas and frogs filled the air, but there was something else. A low, irregular scraping on the porch. Mike thought it was the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling it was deliberate. Rufus, our old shepherd mix we brought along, stayed near the front door, growling at shadows. The next morning, I went inside the house alone. The smell of mildew and decay was thick, clinging to the wooden floors and furniture left behind. In the kitchen, I found a small notebook, wedged behind a loose panel. It was Uncle Harold's handwriting, dated back decades, filled with strange entries. Mentions of them in the woods, observations of shadows, and a series of initials, JM, AH, and MC. Most entries were harmless, mundane, but some were unsettling. "The girl watches again today. I cannot leave her alone." That night, after Mike went to bed, I heard footsteps in the attic. Heavy, deliberate steps pacing back and forth. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously climbed the stairs. The attic was empty, save for dust-covered furniture and a small child's doll, its eyes scratched out. The door slammed behind me. I ran downstairs, heart hammering. Mike was awake, pale, clutching a kitchen knife. He said he heard the same pacing. Over the next few days, the incidents intensified. We found footprints on the porch, barefoot and small, never reaching the yard. Doors we had locked were open in the morning. A rocking chair in the living room moved slightly, though no wind blew through the sealed windows. Rufus refused to go near the back of the house, growling at shadows we couldn't see. One afternoon, we explored the forest behind the house. Mike found an old, rusted swing set, half buried in leaves. Near it lay a faded red ball. I picked it up. On closer inspection, scratches formed letters, MC. The initials matched one in the notebook. As I held the ball, a cold wind brushed past my neck, though the air was still. We turned to leave and saw a figure, a young girl, pale, hair hanging in front of her face, standing near the tree line. When we blinked, she was gone. That night, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Heavy knocking came from the walls, doors, windows. Mike and I huddled in the living room with Rufus between us. The knocking became scratching, then whispering. I could make out words, "Don't leave me. Stay. Help me." I froze, realizing the voice was childlike. The whispers grew frantic, surrounding us in the room, then silence. The following morning, we discovered scratches on the inside of the windows, as if someone or something had been clawing to get in. Outside, footprints led from the porch into the woods, then vanished. In the notebook, an entry caught my eye, dated 1972. Mary has wandered too close. The forest doesn't let her leave. I hear her at night. Research at the county records revealed a horrifying truth. A girl named Mary Coleman, age 10, had disappeared near the farmhouse in 1972. Her body was never found. Other children had vanished from the area over the years, always near the woods behind the house. The initials in the notebook matched the names of missing children. Uncle Harold had been documenting their sightings, trying to track them. By the third night, the hauntings escalated. Doors slammed repeatedly, the attic creaked with footsteps, and the whispers became cries. The red ball would appear in different rooms, never where we had left it. One morning, I woke to find it in my bed. A single note written in a child's hand scratched into the wood floor. Play with me. We decided to leave, packed our belongings quickly, and drove back to Pittsburgh. The house remained abandoned, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched as we left. A few weeks later, Mike called. He had received a package, the same red ball sitting on his doorstep with a note, "Come back." Years have passed. The house still stands in the forest, untouched. Local children speak of seeing a girl in white near the tree line, sometimes holding a red ball and sometimes just standing silently, watching. I've never gone back. Sometimes in my dreams I see her, a pale figure emerging from the trees, her eyes hollow, holding out a red ball. I wake in a cold sweat, my heart racing, knowing that the forest has not let her go, and somehow neither has it let us. Story the end. On a chilly winter evening in upstate New York, in a quiet stretch of old wood-framed homes lining a winding country lane, a young couple named Jack and Emily moved into their first house together. The house stood on the edge of a small town, Nelson Falls, a place where the snow fell heavy, the trees groaned in the wind, and the nights felt long even in summer. They were exhilarated. Buying the house had felt like a dream come true, a fresh start away from the city. The house was built in the early 1900s, with creaky floorboards, tall windows, and a sagging front porch. They knew it would need work. They had saved for years. They spent the first evening lighting the fireplace, unpacking boxes, and celebrating quietly. The wind pressed at the window panes, moaning softly as if testing the seals. Emily pulled the curtains closed, sealed a draft under the door, and gave Jack a reassuring smile. "We're safe here," she said. Their first nights were peaceful. Icy air, sheets of snow outside, the low hum of the furnace. But after a week, things changed. It began subtly. A soft tap in the hallway, just when Jack or Emily were drifting towards sleep. Something knocked lightly on the wooden floor above their bedroom. At first, they chalked it up to settling. A house this old did that. But the taps continued, always around 3:11 a.m., soft yet deliberate. They would wake, listen. The upstairs floorboards creaked. Nothing else. Eventually the sound faded and they drifted back to sleep. Then, one snow-heavy night, Emily awoke to the smell of wood smoke. She sat up, blinking until the firelight glowed across her face. But the fireplace hadn't been lit. Jack was sleeping soundly. She held her breath, listening. The smell grew stronger, acrid, lumber dust mixed with something chemical. She got out of bed, padded to the hallway. The smell extended down the stairwell. She flicked the light. At the bottom, the front door was cracked open just a sliver, not enough for a person to pass, but enough to feel the cold gusts that rushed in and ruffled the coats hanging inside. Jack woke then, flashlight in hand. They closed the door, relocked it. Jack peered out into the snowy darkness, illuminated by the weak porch light. He saw footprints in the snow, outside the windows. 3 heavy boots, muddy, starting from the path near the woods, trailing toward the house, pausing by the door, then back again. The snow hadn't fallen much since they'd arrived. They realized the prints must have appeared that night. The next morning, Jack called the local police. They arrived, examined the prints, took photographs. They noted that the prints tracked across the yard, stopped by the front step, then retreated toward the woods. No footprints within the porch, no evidence of forced entry. The officer suggested someone may have been peering in, perhaps casing the house. It could have been kids, it could have been nothing, but the couple felt unsettled. For the next few nights, Jack insisted on staying awake until dawn. One night at about 2:47 a.m., the lights flickered, then died. The house plunged into darkness. Emily clutched Jack's arm as he fumbled for his phone torch. The old wires groaned, the furnace rattled. Then Jack heard it, a long scraping sound behind the house, like a metal bar being dragged across wood, or frozen earth. The sound circled the house, moving slowly, deliberate. It paused at the large back window. Emily's phone flashlight beam caught movement. A figure at the window, one hand holding something cylindrical, maybe a wrench. The figure was shrouded in darkness. The snow fell against the window pane, masking details, but the silhouette's head turned toward the light. Emily gasped. The figure backed away, melting into the tree line. Jack dialed 911. The dispatcher told him an officer would be there soon. He stayed on the line, peering through the curtain at the fallen snow and trees. He thought he saw a shadow move just beyond the porch light's sweep. The police arrived in minutes. They searched the yard, found drag marks in the snow, straight lines from the back door area into the woods about 10 feet long, deep enough to suggest a heavy object. They found no tools, no items missing, yet the couple felt as if something had been moved here, buried there. They decided to stay at Emily's parents' house until they could install security lights, cameras, and a nice new lock. They left the house dimly lit, windows covered, cameras recording. After a week, they returned. The cameras were ready. That first night at about 3:03 a.m., an alert pinged on Jack's phone. Motion detected at the north yard. The camera's night vision flickered. He watched as a dark figure emerged from the woods. A tall man in a parka, hood up, carrying a long metal pipe over his shoulder. He surveyed the house, stopping at the front door. He raised the pipe, paused, then knocked. Just once. The knock echoed on the front door. Then he turned and dropped into the woods. Jack and Emily watched through the screen, frozen. The police were called again. The man was seen, a dark hood, tall. They found more prints, more drag marks, but no suspect. Over the next days, they found other signs. 3 small stones placed at the edge of the driveway, each with a single letter scratched on them. S-T-Y. They didn't know what it meant. They cleaned them up and tossed them in the trash. They decided to have the house professionally checked for internal issues, old wiring, drafts, but all came back normal. Still, they felt watched. Then came the worst night. A heavy snowstorm howled outside, rattling the windows with sleet. Jack awoke to the sound of something heavy hitting the roof. He yanked open his eyes. He listened. Thud, thud, thud. He felt the bed vibrate with each impact. He rolled over to wake Emily. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. They heard a grating noise above them. Footsteps on the roof. They jolted upright. Jack grabbed his phone flashlight and headed toward the stairwell. The light fell on the ceiling plaster, tack wet with melted snow and dripping. The door to the attic hatch stood open, swinging slightly, and light snow drifted in. The hatch had been latched. Jack had checked it before bed. Suddenly, the lights went out. The house plunged into darkness, the furnace shut off. Emily shrieked. They scrambled downstairs to the living room, flashlight in hand, and huddled together. Outside, they heard the front door glass panel crack, splintering like ice breaking. The front step light exploded. Jack shouted out the window, "Who's there?" The snow pelted the panes. No answer. They called the neighbor, told them to watch the house until the police arrived. The neighbor came over, the police came again. The roof had been tampered with, shovel marks, snow piled in odd mounds, footprints traced an arc across the roof from tree line to edge. The attic hatch had been forced open. Someone had been in the attic space. That someone may have had access to wiring, drains, insulation. The police told them to consider leaving, get out of the house while the investigation was underway. Jack and Emily agreed. They packed overnight and stayed with family for 2 weeks. During those weeks, the investigators reviewed neighborhood security footage from other homes. They found nothing helpful. They checked local pawnshop records. Nothing final. Yet the couple was left with a feeling they had been targeted for reasons unknown. It wasn't burglary. They had nothing of great value. It was intimidation, violation. When they returned, they chose not to stay in the house at night for the first week. They kept all lights on, streamed TV at full volume, left cameras active. They even turned the attic into a locked room. They trimmed back the woods high up near the house, cleared the branches so nothing could lean near the windows. They upgraded the front door, got a reinforced frame. Months passed. The scraping sounds stopped. The knocks in the night ceased. The letter stones disappeared. The footprints vanished. Jack and Emily tried to convince themselves it was over. Life resumed. They hosted dinners, invited friends, trusted again. But one night, 2 years later, Emily awoke to the sound of whistling. Soft, melodic, somewhere just outside the bedroom window. She froze. She nudged Jack. He opened his eyes. The whistling turned into a muttered phrase, so quiet she couldn't understand it. She felt the hairs on her neck rise. The window curtain rustled. She peered across the dark yard. Beyond the floodlight's reach, beyond the snowdrifts, a figure stood, as if watching. The floodlight caught only a shadow. Then it moved away, silently. They called the police again, but there was nothing tangible. Just the memory of the footprint arcs, the attic intrusion, the single knock at the door, the heavy pipe, the drawn-out dragging. They realized the house had never been safe. Not truly. They had been invaded, not just their home, but their peace. Jack and Emily completed their mortgage, painted the house, added a deck. They lived there, attempted to forget. But at times, especially when winter night winds howl or the furnace sighs under pressure, they remember. The sound of metal scraping in the snow, a shadow in the woods. The feel of a presence that wanted them to know they were being watched. Because sometimes the worst horror isn't what you see, it's what you feel. The slow encroachment of fear, the knowledge that someone entered your space, touched your home, left you trembling. And though the intruder may never return, the damage remains. Story the end. In the dense forests of northern Michigan, near the small town of Gray Pine, there was a stretch of road locals called Whispering Pines Lane. Few ventured there at night, especially in the dead of winter, because of the eerie silence that seemed to hang over the snow-covered pines and the strange stories people whispered about the area. But for 26-year-old Matt Lawson, it was simply the shortcut home from his job at a local auto shop. It was late December, a week before Christmas, when Matt was driving his old pickup truck down the lane. Snow crunched under the tires, and the headlights cut a narrow path through the towering pines. The wind howled, rattling the cab, and Matt felt a chill that wasn't just from the cold. He rounded a bend when he saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road, half hidden behind the trees. At first, he thought it was someone stranded, maybe a hiker or a hitchhiker. But as he slowed, the figure stepped forward. Matt could see it was a man, unusually tall, and he was wearing a mask, white, expressionless, like a blank face staring into nothing. The man raised one hand, pointing toward the woods. Matt slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The truck skidded slightly, snow spraying against the tires. When he looked again, the figure was gone. He told himself it was a trick of the shadows and pressed on. A mile later, the truck's engine sputtered and died. He tried to restart it, but it only coughed. The temperature outside had dropped rapidly, frost forming on the windshield. Matt grabbed his jacket and flashlight and stepped out, hoping the warmth of walking would help. The forest was silent, too silent. He heard nothing but the crunch of his boots in the snow. Then behind him, a scraping sound, low and deliberate, like something heavy being dragged over the frozen ground. Matt spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the black. Nothing. But the sound continued, circling slowly, coming closer. Matt ran toward the trees, hoping to find a higher road or at least some shelter, when he noticed footprints in the snow, large, deep, boot-like impressions leading toward him from the road. They were too large to be normal, and every few feet, the snow was disturbed, as if something had been dragged along. Panic surged through him. He stumbled, fell, and when he looked up, the masked figure was standing 10 feet away, crowbar or pipe in hand, glinting in the flashlight beam. Matt scrambled back, tripping over the snow-covered roots. The figure advanced slowly, silently, then stopped and gestured to the truck. Matt understood without thinking. He needed to get back to the vehicle. He ran, lunged inside, and slammed the door. He tried the ignition. Nothing. The figure pounded on the hood, metal ringing sharply in the night. Matt grabbed the phone and called 911, but the signal was weak, the line crackling. 911, what's your emergency? A dispatcher's voice came, distorted. Someone, there's a man, masked. He's trying to break into my truck, Matt shouted, breathless. He kept the flashlight pointed at the windshield, catching the shadowed face for a moment. The masked man didn't speak. He simply stared. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, Matt remembered the spare keys in his coat pocket. He retrieved them, unlocked the passenger door, and hot-wired the truck in desperation. The engine roared, startling the figure. He floored the accelerator, snow spraying behind him, tires spinning. The figure stepped back, then melted into the woods as Matt sped down the lane. The next day, deputies combed the area. They found footprints leading from the roadside into the dense forest, drag marks where a long metal object had been pulled through the snow. Nothing else. No trace of the man, no stolen items, nothing to indicate his identity. Matt was shaken. Friends and family urged him to leave the area, but he had no choice. Work, bills, responsibilities. He installed cameras at his home and motion sensor lights, but each night, when the wind howled through the pines, he would hear faint scraping sounds, or sometimes a low whistle just outside, as if reminding him the woods still held secrets. Weeks later, a package arrived at his door. No return address. Inside was a single small note written in red ink. "I saw you last night. Stay on the road." Matt kept it, pressed it into a drawer, hoping it would be the last reminder of that night, but the feeling never left. Every time he drove down Whispering Pines Lane, he felt eyes on him. Every night, when the snow fell and the trees groaned in the wind, he remembered the tall masked man, the scraping in the dark, the crowbar glinting in the flashlight beam. He never saw the figure again, but he never forgot the terror of that night, the sense of being hunted in a place that should have been quiet and safe. Because sometimes the forest is not empty, sometimes it watches. Story the end. The winter of 2003 in northern Michigan was bitter, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made every breath hurt. My friend Lisa and I had decided to rent a small cabin on the outskirts of Traverse City for a weekend getaway, just a break from the city. The cabin was advertised as secluded, private, with beautiful forest views. It looked perfect online, a 2-story log structure with a stone chimney and a porch that wrapped around the front. We arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the pine-covered hills. The road was nothing more than a snow-packed trail, barely wide enough for our car. By the time we reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. Snow crunched under our boots as we unloaded luggage. The air smelled of pine, frozen earth, and wood smoke. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of mothballs and old pine, untouched for what must have been months. The first night was uneventful, except that Lisa kept insisting she felt someone watching her. "It's probably just the woods," I said. But when I turned on the porch light, the shadows seemed heavier, longer, almost moving on their own. The fireplace had logs stacked neatly, but the fire wouldn't light. No matter what we tried, the wood smoked, sputtered, and died. The next morning, we explored the surrounding forest. A narrow trail wound through thick pines. We came upon an old wooden shed, half collapsed. Inside, there were tools rusted through, an overturned bucket, and at the back, a pile of clothes that looked decades old. A child's dress, frayed at the hem, lay on top. I picked it up, and the fabric was stiff, almost frozen solid. Lisa suggested we leave it, but I couldn't shake the feeling it had been left for us to find. That evening, as the wind howled outside, the cabin seemed alive. Footsteps creaked across the floor above us, the loft area, though we hadn't gone upstairs. The dog we had brought along, a rescue named Max, growled and whimpered in the corner. The sound of tapping began at the windows like fingernails drumming on glass. Lisa grabbed a kitchen knife. "We are not alone," she whispered. We called the property owner. He answered groggily, insisting no one else had been at the cabin and that the property had been empty for years. I asked about the shed. He hesitated, then muttered, "Don't go in there." "Not anymore." We hung up, uneasy. Later that night, while trying to sleep, I woke to a scraping noise from the loft. I turned on the flashlight and shone it upward. A shadow flickered against the railing. Tall, thin, childlike. I called Lisa's name. She froze, eyes wide. Max barked furiously, hair on end. The shadow disappeared. We didn't sleep again. The next morning, we noticed footprints in the snow around the cabin, small, barefoot prints leading up to the porch, stopping abruptly at the steps. The prints weren't ours. We checked inside. The loft door, which we had locked, was ajar. Inside, the air was icy, our breath visible. On the floor lay a small wooden toy, a carved animal, old, worn, painted in chipped colors. It hadn't been there before. We tried to leave, but the snowstorm had intensified, and the road was impassable. That night, the sounds returned. Footsteps pacing overhead, doors opening and slamming, whispers just at the edge of hearing. Lisa claimed she saw a little girl standing at the foot of her bed, pale, hair hanging over her face, the small dress from the shed she had spotted earlier. The girl didn't speak. She just stared. By morning, the storm had lifted, and we could leave. We packed quickly. As we drove down the narrow trail, I looked back and saw her. At the cabin window, the little girl stood motionless, staring, holding her dress like a ragged flag. Weeks later, I looked up local history. The cabin had belonged to the Larson family in the 1970s. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The girl, named Emily Larson, had disappeared one winter day while playing outside. The boy vanished months later. No bodies were ever found. Locals whispered that the woods around the cabin had claimed them. I never returned to Michigan. Lisa tried once, but after standing on the old trail leading to the cabin, she said she felt the same watching presence and left immediately. Sometimes I dream of that little girl, pale and silent, standing in the snow with her eyes hollow. I wake up with the sensation of being watched, and I know she's still out there, waiting in the forest, holding her frozen dress. Story, the end.